Ben Jamal, Director of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, is with us. It's good to see you, as
Morning,
always.
Kay.
Thanks for taking the time. President Biden has said overnight that hospitals in Gaza must be protected. What more needs to be done?
Well, I think the answer is straightforward. We need an immediate ceasefire. We're not going to see an end to what the UN, World Health Organization, has been describing for the past few weeks as a humanitarian catastrophe. We've had over 11,000 Palestinians now killed, including 4,500 children. But there is an imminent threat to the hospitals. More than a third of the hospitals in Gaza are already out of commission because of attacks. And now, obviously, the concern is about the main hospitals in Gaza City, including our Shifa hospital, where hundreds of people are gathering, where there are hundreds of patients. And as you've been reporting, where we have children on incubators who are facing the imminent risk of death. So the only way of stopping this is to stop the bombing, then get in humanitarian aid, and then start the task of reconstructing Gaza. The other fact people should remember is there's 1.3 million people, more than half the population of Gaza, who are displaced. Half of the housing in Gaza has been destroyed. We don't know, those people don't know if they've got homes to go back to. So if we're going to stop this humanitarian catastrophe that Israel is causing, then we need to stop the bombing.
But you need Western countries to back you in that.
Yes.
And President Biden stopped short of calling for a ceasefire yesterday. We know that the British government are not calling for a ceasefire either.
No, they're not. I think the international consensus, certainly in terms of Western governments, not in terms of governments across the world, but the international consensus that there has been in terms of Western governments in saying Israel must be allowed to continue is starting to fracture. We've seen Emmanuel Macron call for a ceasefire. Some of your viewers would have seen the comments of Blinken's, who wrote to his staff indicating, we know how deeply distressed you are at our policy at the moment. We, like you, are seeing the scenes. So,
not calling for a ceasefire.
Not calling for a ceasefire, but I think that's unsustainable. But look, I go back to the very beginning of this and a moment where I was chilled. I watched somebody on Newsnight, an American analyst, who was asked the question, how many Palestinians do you think will be killed before there's serious pressure on Israel to call for a ceasefire? And he gave a forensic analysis. He looked at what happened in 2014, how many were killed then. He looked at how many had already been killed, and he gave an answer that chilled me. He said, I think we should be talking about 20,000 Palestinians. And I thought that's inconceivable.
Suggesting about 11.
We're already up to 11,000. Are we seriously, is our government going to sit here and say, well, we need at least double what's been killed already before actually we find our moral compass, describe this for what it is, which is the commission of war crimes, and say no more people should be killed. There needs to be a ceasefire. It's a simple moral test.
Israel is allowed to target hospitals if they feel that the enemy is using that hospital for different purposes, harmful purposes.
Well, look, the framework has to be international law, and it's very clear. And one of the things the Israeli government is doing at the moment is asking the world to accept some new definition of proportionality. We saw this last week when it launched an attack on Jabalia refugee camp, and it justified the killing of over 100 Palestinians, including children, on the basis that it killed one Hamas commander. So what we're being asked to accept now is Israel's making the argument that there are Hamas operatives within this hospital. I don't know if that's true.
They've shown us.
What did
you make of the news conference yesterday?
Well, look, do I trust the Israeli government to be accurate in what it's saying? No, I don't, and history tells me not to do that. But the argument we're being asked to accept, which is outside the framework of international law, that if it is true that there may be Hamas operatives in those hospitals, then it's okay to bomb hundreds of civilians, children, patients who are dying, babies in incubators. That's acceptable. Now, that's illegal.
But let's
return to a basic framework of morality. And there's a simple moral test. And the next stage for our government, there is an amendment that should be voted on Wednesday. An amendment put down by the Scottish Nationalist Party to the King's Speech calling for a ceasefire. Any MP of conscience, any MP who can look at these scenes and not come to the judgment that we need a ceasefire, there's a simple moral test for all of them on Wednesday, and they need to vote for a ceasefire.
And if they don't?
well, then we will continue to pressure. And I think we saw this on Saturday.
Just to clarify, you're saying that politicians who don't vote in favour of this amendment are morally corrupt?
I think they're failing a basic moral test. I think this is... Look, we have, last week, 800 scholars of war crimes and genocide studies formed the judgment, put an open letter out to the leaders of the world saying what we are seeing unfolding here is a textbook case of genocide. They formed that argument based on what Israel was already doing in terms of how many people it had killed and the statements of Israeli ministers indicating what their further intentions were. We've had
2 points then I want to pick up on there. What would you say to those politicians who were thinking about voting against the ceasefire?
I would say reach for your moral conscience, but reach for the application of international law. History will judge us on how we act now, all of us, but particularly political leaders. And we have to, if we believe in the principles of human rights and international law, we have to apply those indiscriminately. And if people are committing war crimes, no politician in the House of Commons had any difficulty in calling out Putin for his illegal occupation of Ukraine and his bombing of Ukrainian civilians. But the numbers being killed in Gaza are far exceeding that. There's a simple moral test. And if people cannot call for a ceasefire, it's very difficult, and I speak as a Palestinian, it's very difficult not to form the judgment that what's being said here is Palestinian lives.
OK, some comparisons that you can make there, but lots of others you can't. Let me ask about Hamas. Do you condemn them for working in the basement of hospitals?
Well, look, again, the framework has to be international law, and I've been consistent from the start. The framework is international law. International law is very clear about what is legal and what is not legal. The targeting, the killing of civilians is illegal.
I'm asking about Hamas.
I'm including Hamas within that framework. On October the 7th, it undertook an operation in which civilians were targeted and killed. That's illegal under international law, and it should be condemned. But I don't know if that's true. And if it is true that they're operating inside a hospital and endangering civilian life, then that should be dealt with through international law. But if Israel responds by dropping a bomb, Israel has moral agency here. Whatever Hamas is doing, if Israel decides its response is to drop bombs on hospitals, kill children, kill babies and incubators, it is accountable for its violations of international law. And our leaders should be able to say that. They should be able to condemn those acts, and they should be able to condemn the statements of Israeli ministers, including an Israeli minister who said we should drop a nuclear bomb on Israel.
He then went back on those words.
He remains in post.
He went back on those words. He corrected himself and apologised. Another march this weekend?
This weekend, we have called on people to take action in towns and cities across the UK. We're expecting that actions to take place, vigils, protests, marches in over 150 towns and cities across the UK. We will, if the ceasefire is not called, regather and ask people to come back for London for another huge march. We had over 800,000 people marching on Saturday, and the call for a ceasefire is growing. It is supported by the vast majority of the British public. It's our leaders who are out of sync with public opinion.
Finally, views on those from the far right that would do you wrong?
Well, look, on Saturday, we had a march that was peaceful, orderly, lots of families represented. We had far-right activists, pro-Israel, far-right activists doing two things. Some gathered at the cenotaph because they thought they had to protect the cenotaph. They'd been told so by Suella Braverman. Others gathered to try to attack our march. We had a moment on Saturday where we had to wait for 15, 20 minutes near Vauxhall Bridge whilst the police cordoned off a pub where they had gone in, found far-right activists, many of them with knives. They prevented a very serious incident by cordoning off the pub, keeping it cordoned off for 4.5 hours as the march went by. Those people have moral responsibility for what they were doing, for the scenes of violence they were committing, but politicians like Suella Braverman, who engineered that situation, by defaming those marching, calling us hate mongers and making stupid suggestions that the cenotaph was somehow under attack, bear their responsibility for what happened, and it's appropriate that she's been removed from office.
Ben, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Kay.
Really appreciate it.